Hello everyone, today I'll be narrating 3 new creepyposts that I found off of the Let's Not Meet subreddit. Liking this video and subscribing to my channel helps me a lot. After you've heard these stories, let me know what you think of them in the comments below. But without further ado, let's dive straight into their experiences.
These are their stories.
This was back in 2015 or 2016. I'm a career tow truck driver. At this point, I've been towing cars for most of my adult life, and will likely do so until I either retire or die, whichever comes first. At the time, I was working for a pretty small towing company with only 2 employees, and we rotated who was on call each weekend. It was my weekend on call and it was summer, so with people being out and about late and whatnot, I was pretty busy. Cleaning up accidents, towing broken down cars both in the city and off the highway. I was fine with it, as I was paid commission at the time, so the more calls I did, the more money I made. So it's Saturday night, now Sunday morning, and it's around 2:33 in the morning, and like I said, I've been busy. I'm tired, a little grumpy, and kinda wanna go home when my phone rings. It's an insurance company calling asking if we can do a tow for one of their customers who is broken down on the side of the highway. The breakdown location they gave me is about 15 miles out of town, which I normally wouldn't do, but the tow destination happens to be a dealership that's just a couple of minutes from my apartment. I contemplate rejecting the call, but because I'm paid commission, I figure screw it. I can run up and grab this car, drop it off around the corner from my place, then hopefully I can head home and get a couple of hours of shut-eye. So I take the call and hop on the highway. The insurance company provided me with the customer's first name, which we'll say was Kara, and gave me a phone number for her. Usually I try to make contact with people who are on the side of the highway to let them know I'm on my way and give them an ETA. I try calling her a couple of times, but she doesn't answer, not unusual. After a short while, I see hazard lights up the way on the shoulder, so I turn on my strobes and start slowing down. As I approach, I notice that not only is there the late model car that I'm looking for, but there's another car on scene as well that doesn't have its hazards on, but it's parked in front of the car I'm meant to tow. This is annoying but not uncommon, as I need to be able to get in front of the disabled car in order to load it, and sometimes people don't realize that. But because the other car is there, I instead pull up behind both cars. You do this so that as the tow driver, you're the one that has to make the weird maneuver of pulling off the shoulder and back onto the shoulder, and that the other car just has to drive straight forward on the shoulder. Otherwise, if I pulled up in front, then the other car would have to go around me, and it's unprofessional and unsafe to make them do that. Standing in the trunk of the late model car, which is now directly in front of me, are a man and a woman. The woman is probably in her early 20s and dressed to the nines for a night out. She's about 5'1" or 5'2". She's wearing tight leather-ish or something pants, a halter top, long black hair. The man is probably around 5'10" and skinny, maybe 150 to 160 pounds, wearing a dark hoodie and dirty jeans. They're standing very close and facing each other. She has her arms crossed and he's leaning down talking to her. I step out of my truck and approach them both, introduce myself. They separate a few feet and I look to the woman and say, "Are you Kara?" She nods. I say I'm here for her insurance company and I ask what's going on with the car. Immediately, the man pipes up and says, "Yeah, it's just having some fuel issues. It's an easy fix. Can you just drop it off at this commuter parking lot? I'm gonna fix it for her there." I'm rather annoyed at this because the commuter lot in question is further up the highway and I'm already 15 miles out of town. Like I said before, I only took this call because it was supposed to be coming back toward my apartment and I really wanted to go home. Not only that, but in order to change the original tow destination, I would have to call the insurance company back, wait on hold for who knows how long for a representative, and then let them know the change and try to get them to pay me extra for the deadhead miles back home after unloading, and I really didn't want to do any of this. And thirdly, this is a late model car. I'm no mechanic, but it's new enough that whatever's wrong with it is likely covered under warranty, so the dealership is really the best place for it to go anyways. I explain all of this to the guy, but he's really not having it. He gets stern with me, saying something like, "Look man, you just need to take the car where I tell you to take it." We go back and forth on this for maybe 60 seconds and he's just getting madder. "Well, you know what man, you're not the name insured, Kara is." The easy way to settle this is to ask what she wants me to do with the car, and whatever she says is what I'll do. Fingers crossed she'll want to take it to the dealership so I can get home sooner. I turn to look at Kara to ask her that question and I don't see her right away. She's no longer standing where she just was a minute ago, which was slightly off to my right. I continue to not see her until I've turned almost all the way around, because she's standing directly behind me, and by directly I mean within an inch of my back, arms still crossed. I look down at her and she locks eyes with me. Her Her eyes are as white as plates, almost owl-like, and immediately it feels like she's staring into my soul. She didn't say a word and she didn't have to. I took a step back and did what felt like a double take. I looked at him, then at her, then at him again, and then back at her, and it slowly started to dawn on me that maybe something isn't right. I asked her, "Do you know this guy?" And she ever so slightly shook her head no. Without a word, the guy starts to move for Kara, and I move to stay in between them. He tries to push me out of his way by shoving me in the chest, but because I believe he underestimated my weight, only pushed me hard enough to make me take a single step back. Immediately, I took that step forward towards him and body check him hard as I could, hard enough to completely knock him over basically onto his back. Because we rotated during the back and forth push bit, Kara is now in front of me to my right, somewhat between me and the guy who's trying to scramble to his feet. I reached out and snatched the poor girl up by her waist, spun her towards my truck and yelled for her to get into the driver's side, and she does so. I turn back to the guy who's standing up again at this point, and he's breathing hard. He gets right up in my face but doesn't do anything, just breathes at me. I stare him right in his face and tell him, "You need to go." I'm shaken now and I'm absolutely terrified. I don't know if he has a weapon, I don't know if he's gonna try to fight me, and I don't know what I would do if he did. After probably around 15 seconds or so, which felt like eons, he kinda huffs a bit, smiles one of the creepiest smiles I've ever seen, and starts to back off. Sucking his teeth and rubbing his hands together, he slowly walks backwards a few steps, then makes his way to the front car, gets in and drives off. I stayed motionless, watching him until I could no longer see his taillights. I got Kara's car loaded up on the tow truck, and as we made our way to the dealership, she told me through tears that her car had shut off while she was driving, and she pulled onto the shoulder and called her parents because she was on their insurance. Her parents made the call to the insurance company, who eventually dispatched me to her location. While she was waiting, a bit after she made the call, the guy pulled up in front of her and walked up to her passenger side window to try to talk to her, asking if she needed help, etc. And she told him she was fine, that a tow truck was coming, and that she didn't need help. He persisted and she tried to tell him off and eventually tried to roll up on the window. Apparently he stuck his arm in the window and got the door unlocked and opened the door. In fear, she jumped out of the car, leaving her phone inside, and ran to the back of her car and stayed put there because it was in the line of sight of traffic. Apparently he was pretty lewd with her, and whenever she tried to go back to the car, he would prevent her from getting in. Several minutes later I showed up. Who knows what would have happened had the timing been any different. Her parents were waiting at the dealership when we arrived, and she told them what had just happened. Her parents gave me a $20 tip, which was all the cash they had on them at the time, and Kara gave me a very tight and clearly heartfelt hug before I left. I never saw her again. To set the tone, I always hated the town I lived in. I moved there alone when I was 18 for college and quickly regretted it. It was a decent sized town but full of not decent people. Nearly every gas station was robbed frequently, there were shootings in broad daylight, robberies, you name it. Well, for the first 3 years I lived with roommates on a side of town that wasn't awful, but it was sketchy. So when I was making decent enough money, I moved out on my own. The house was tiny, maybe 500 square feet if that, super old and poorly built. It was just me living there, so I didn't mind how small it was, but what originally sold me was that it was in the middle of nowhere. It was surrounded by a bunch of fields and some wooded areas with only a few houses nearby. Considering I hated being in the town due to the continuous paranoia of getting mugged or shot, I loved the idea of living out there, so at the beginning of July I moved in. Everything seemed super swell minus not being able to get good internet. A month goes by and everything is still swell to me, and I decided to get a dog to keep me company. He also loved the place and spent long amounts of time lounging about the yard and trying to convince the nearest neighbor to walk over and pet him. Important later. Roughly 2 months into living there, I started to notice things at a place. Something to note is that an old roommate of mine was using my spare room as a storage place until he got moved himself, so he had a key but was never there. He kind of just popped in every other week to grab something and usually let me know beforehand. But I'd come home to my kitchen chair being pulled away from my table or a bowl in the sink, things like that. There were such small things I wrote off as my roommate swinging by or just stuff I was forgetting. But then my dog developed this crazy bad separation anxiety. Up until now, he didn't even care when I left. He just lay on the couch and chew his toys. He never barked, never did anything weird. However, all of a sudden he began acting really awful every time I tried to leave. He'd literally cram his body through the door as I was closing it, screaming and barking, and wouldn't stop until I came back in the house. He didn't want me to leave him there alone, at all. I couldn't afford a kennel for him yet, so I decided one day that I'd put a movie in while I was out, thinking maybe the sound of people talking might keep him calmed down. I only had to finish one task up at work work and knew I'd be home early, so I put in a copy of Hamlet. I know, boring, but I chose it because the copy I have is 5 hours long. I knew it would be playing when I came back. Flash forward 3 hours, long before Hamlet should have been over, but when I walked in the door, not only was the movie not playing, but the TV and the Xbox were completely off. I immediately called my roommate and asked if he had been over, and he wasn't even in town. I explained the TV situation to him and he shrugged it off as the TV powering off when it idles for a while. Even though this is true, there are several reasons I know this isn't the case. 1, it wasn't idling. A 5-hour movie was supposed to be playing. 2, even if it had shut off, my Xbox wouldn't have. I have left it on by accident for weeks. I was gone out of town or whatever, and it was still on when I came home. Always. But it was completely powered down this time. The weird thing is none of my stuff was missing and the door was locked when I entered. I eventually convinced myself that it was something weird with the Xbox or whatever and shrugged it off. That is until my dog started acting even weirder. Remember earlier I mentioned he used to play with a neighbor? Well, all of a sudden, if she even walked by the house while he was out, he'd start yelping and running at me away from her. This was incredibly weird to me and made me incredibly cautious of her. I put some cheap alarms on my doors, the kind that go off when the door is opened, and slept with my pistol handy. The second night the alarms were on my doors, I was woken up by the one on the back door going off. I flew out of my bed with my pistol, trying to convince myself that I was about to shoot some intruder, but once I got to the door it was shut and there was nobody there. The alarm had been knocked all the way across the room. The door would have had to open for it to be chucked like that. It couldn't have fallen off and landed there. Something else weird, the door was locked, but not the way I had locked it. I always locked the knob and the deadbolt, but upon checking my lock after this, only the doorknob was locked. The police wouldn't do much as I had no witnesses, no lead, and they didn't have much to go on. Needless to say, I changed the locks. I didn't have any noticeable problems inside after that, but later found out that the close neighbor that my dog hated had previously lived in the house I was renting, and the locks had never been changed. I have no way to prove my theory, but it's pretty obvious she had a key and was coming and going as she pleased. Why though, I can't figure out. Nothing of mine ever went missing. The most unsettling part for me though, is that she had tried to come in at night until the alarm scared her off. How many times has she been in my house at night while I was asleep, and why? Not sure. Luckily though, I don't live there anymore and never plan to move back there. A while ago, I was staying in an upscale hotel in the safe area of a large Midwestern city. I am a 16-year-old female and I was in a room all by myself with my parents a few doors down. In theory, this isn't unsafe by any means, but I had bad luck on this particular trip. Our first night there passed without incident. Me in my room, my parents in theirs. I watched a pay-per-view movie and ate way too much from the snack bar. I didn't have any reason to feel unsafe. The next morning, we did the usual tourist stuff that one does when visiting a new city. As we ate at breakfast in the hotel restaurant, I noticed a man who looked to be in his 60s staring at me for an abnormally long amount of time. I ignored it and chalked it up to him thinking I looked like his granddaughter or something. The next night, my parents allowed me to meet up with a friend for dinner who lived in the area. He met me in the hotel lobby and we had a nice dinner and then went back to the hotel for drinks. Yes, I am underage, I had a drink, my bad. Coincidentally, the same man who had been eyeing me earlier was at the bar. This time, I knew I didn't remind him of his granddaughter. Even with my buff guy friend next to me, his eyes traced my body. I felt unsettled and mentioned it to my friend, Ethan, who glanced over and also seemed really weirded out by how obvious this guy was leering. We left the bar quickly and by now it was around 12:30 a.m. Ethan walked me to the elevators of the hotel and once I pushed the button, I left. I wish I would have asked him to stay, because no sooner had he walked away that my creeper came, rounding the corner, and stood there waiting with me for the elevator. I felt so uncomfortable knowing that he would be seeing what floor I was going to, but it hadn't occurred to me to get off on a different floor at the time, and even if it did, he planned on following me, so it would have been just as bad a move. When we were in the elevator together, I tried to keep my eyes averted from his, but they literally bore into my body. He kept trying to step closer and I kept backing up, too scared to even speak. What freaked me out more was that he hadn't pressed a separate elevator button, so he planned on getting off when I did. When I got to my floor, I almost ran to my room, and the guy just stood at the end of the hallway, waiting to see where I was going. I stayed in my room for 15 minutes until I was sure he was gone before I told my parents what had happened. They were freaked out and told the hotel staff, but there was no sign of the guy and it was really late, so I just locked my door and tried to get to sleep. I had almost drifted off when I heard a knock at my door. I obviously wouldn't just go and open the door at nearly 2 a.m. Instead, I turned on a light and froze. At this point, my intuition had kicked in and I knew it was the guy. I was near tears, but the knocking kept continuing, harder and harder, so I finally shouted and asked who it was. The voice that replied to me was the most chilling thing I had ever heard. High-pitched but growly growly, almost giggly, and so disturbing I could barely describe it. "It's hotel staff, please let me in." I was terrified. A look through the peephole confirmed that it was the same creepy old guy. I locked myself in the bathroom and called my dad's phone. He has a habit of always keeping his ringer on, so he answered me almost immediately, and I tried to tell him what was wrong through my tears. The guy before I managed is at my door, and what happened next gives me nightmares. My dad naturally went into superhero mode and opened his door to find the old man in just a robe, whacking it. It's pretty obvious to piece together what he was planning. My dad slugged the dude in the face and made sure he didn't move an inch while my mom called hotel security. We pressed charges and the guy's in prison now. Alright, so that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Let me know what you thought of these stories in the comments below. But as always,
Have a nice day.